Erzakt. You know, you have chosen to participate. What happens to you as you sit here? The space between art, Kunst, audience, poetry, metaphor. Born in Leipzig geboren, 1972, 72. Currently living, walking, living, breathing, Berlin. Lecturer, several university art programs, Germany, professor, Art Academy, Leipzig, seminars, San Francisco, Malmo, Stockholm, Edinburgh. I was shot in the back, solo show, 2008 Toronto, 2009 Ghost Ride, ICA, Dunya Virus, Hungary. Later Secession, Vienna. Curatorial work, visual arts practice, curator, artist. The space between, underlying themes, ideas, expression, writing, 2011 writing, LA, Villa Aurora, 3 months, intense writing, Russian poet, Anna Akhmatova, Stalinist terror, potency, poetry, relationships, political, social, phenomenon, multiple strategies, art, context, engagement, Erzakt, sie sagt, Erzakt, sie tritt Seite zur Seite, sie tritt zurück.
Sie sagt abgeholt, abgeholt. Sie sagt, ich glaube dir.
Und das Licht.
Sie sagt, ich glaube dir.
Und noch das Licht.
Sie sagt, ich glaube dir.
Sie sagt und. Er sagt aber das Licht.
Sie sagt und.
Er sagt das Licht.
Sie sagt und. Sie sagt das Licht. Sie sagt und. Sie tritt zurück. Sie sagt und. Sie sagt, ich glaube dir.
Er sagt
Sie sagt und. Sie sagt,
ich
glaube dir.
Er sagt und noch das Licht.
Sie sagt, ich glaube dir.
Er sagt, ich glaube dir.
Sie tritt vor.
Er sagt und.
Sie sagt das Licht.
Er sagt und.
Sie sagt unsere
Er sagt und.
Die unsere noch das Licht. Beide treten zurück. Die Stille folgt. Die Stille folgt der Stille. Die Stille wird verdrängt. Die Stille wird unangenehm verdrängt. Unruhe tritt ein. Sie sagt und.
Er sagt auch das noch.
Sie sagt und das Licht.
Er sagt auch noch.
Sie sagt und noch das Licht.
Er sagt auch.
Sie kommen zueinander.
Er sagt.
Sie sagt und.
Er sagt.
Sie sagt und. Die Stille wird verdrängt. Die Stille wird unangenehm verdrängt. Unruhe tritt ein. Auch. Sie sagt und. Sie stehen beieinander. Sie sagt und das Licht. Sie suchen Ruhe. Sie suchen Stille. Sie sagt deine Lust.
Er sagt schnell und.
Sie sagt auch. Die Stille wird verdrängt. Die Stille wird unangenehm verdrängt. Unruhe tritt ein. Sie sagt und.
Er sagt auch das noch.
This piece is called Sie, und, he, she, and. It was not made for this place, it was not made for Sligo, it was not made for today. It was made in 1996, actually it was written in 1996 as a scenic play, but it took about 14 years to produce it as a sound piece, as the piece you heard. But it was not made for here, it was not made for that space, it was made for a different time, for a different purpose. And the purpose was actually literature performance in 2010 in Munich. It was a performance about spaces, about spatial habits, about spatial filters, about how ideas create their own spaces, how even under the most difficult circumstances, ideas, feelings, emotions, create, define their spaces in life, in world, in our society. We started with an artist, with a writer, Anna Akhmatova, Soviet writer, Russian writer, probably one of the most known poets of the Soviet Union in the 20th century. She was born in 1889, died in 1966. So she lived through 2 world wars, she lived through a revolution, counter-revolution. She lost one husband, a lot of the members of her family got imprisoned because of her poetry, because of her writing. Both of her later husbands were imprisoned because of these words she wrote. Her son was several times imprisoned because of her poetry, of the power of her poetry. And I'm gonna tell you 3 different stories about Anna Akhmatova. I'm not gonna tell you a lot about her life, about her writing, but about the effect her writing had on society back then. There's most of the time in her life, she was not allowed to publish. She was not allowed to write. She was not allowed to read public her poetry. But still the word spread out. And there were periods where for no reason she was all of a sudden to publish her poems. And after the World War II, in 1946, she was actually allowed to public readings, and she was invited to a big public reading in a house they call, in Russia, they call House of the People. It's something like a convention, socialist convention center. And so she was invited there for a reading, and about 800 people showed up for the reading of her poetry. And while she got on stage, like I'm on stage here at this table in this room in front of you, she would get up on stage and start reading, and these 800 people were able to recite the poetry she has written by heart. They didn't need any books, and it was like a fucking rock concert today, and I still get very emotional when I'm talking about this. But it shows, even though she was hardly published, she had hardly any public, the word spread out anyway, defined an existence in the world of the Soviet Union, among people, among the minds and hearts of people. A second story I'm telling you about Anna Akhmatova is related to a situation a lot of women, a lot of people in the Soviet Union were confronted with. Millions of people got killed by the Stalinistic bureaucratic system. Millions of people disappeared. So very often she found herself among these people in front of, in a line, in front of prisons, just to get any note, just to get any information of either her husband, her son, or even other members of her family. So she was standing there and somebody recognized her and they started talking. When this person left, the woman in front of her turned around and they had talked about her writing in relation to the Stalinistic terror. And she turned around and she asked her, "Can you really describe that?" And she said, "Yes, I can." And somehow, somewhat of a smile was on that, was once her face. And for a moment, there was life among these people, among these two people, in the line of a lot of people waiting in front of the prison. Again, it's about the power of poetry. But there's a third story I want to tell you about, which I've been researching a lot on, and I've actually made a work about that. And this starts in 1935, 1936, where she starts writing on a series of poems called Requiem, where she would try to deal with the terror of the Stalinic system of its time, where a million people got killed and disappeared. She was trying to deal with this in signs and metaphors, in a language which kind of was not too explicit what people would immediately be able to recognize. So she was starting to write at this, but at the same time she was not allowed to write. And you have to imagine that something as a privacy we have today in our homes didn't exist at the time. At the time she was living with her husband, her son, her former husband, and his wife, and their relatives in the same apartment as well with other people. This was just one tiny apartment, so privacy didn't exist at the time in the Soviet Union. And it was forbidden for her to write poetry. And she was under constant surveillance by the Secret Service and the government. So what she did, she was still working on these poems, and she would call in friends which then each of this friend had to memorize one of the poems. So there were 11 poems and 11 friends. And if she had reworked the poem, she would call in the same friend again, and he had to rememorize it. So in the beginning, these poems only existed in her head. Then they existed in the head of 11 friends. And then from there they spread out. Except these 11 friends, nobody knew about the author. Nobody knew it was her writing this. And for 25 years there was not any other written existence or proof of these poems in the world. And 25 years later, these poems were published in the Western world, in the United States first. And it took until the Glasnost period in the late 80s in the Soviet Union, these poems to be published in Russian. But, and this is the point I'm trying to make here, they existed, and they had a strong effect, and for a lot of people, it was meant hope that somebody was there to actually put these things in words and actually could handle it. It gave them a hope to handle with their history they were in. So what I'm saying is that poetry, as well as any kind of art, is very important to every society. It's important for us, and places like the model are just very, very important to everybody of us and to society.
I like it here.
at this point I could talk about work I did in 1989 in Luxembourg, which deals with text, which deals with poetry in different ways. It was kind of a research on how text actually exists in the city, but I'm not going to do it. Instead, I could talk about the poetry of a boat here in the Garrote River in Sligo in Ireland. But I'm not going to do this either. Instead, I'm going to talk about a piece I did for the Secession in 2008. It's related to this piece in a way. I'm not sure if I can make this visible during the few minutes I talk about it, but I'll try. But we have to draw back even 100 years more, or even more than 100 years. In the late 19th century, two brothers from Germany were invited. They got an invitation from the king of Austria-Hungary, Austria at the time. He invited them to use the workshops, to use the knowledge and the quality of craftsmanship to work on their ideas of chairs. So a lot of the chairs we know today in Europe from coffee shops are designed by these two brothers, Toner brothers, in Vienna actually. Long time later, I get a call from Vienna, like these guys, for an invitation for an exhibition at the Secession. And this was 2007. And they invited me to do an exhibition there. The Secession, you have to know, is the oldest artist-run space in the world, and it's still run by artists and a group of cultural people like architects and so on. There's a committee who decides which artists get invited and to show in the space, and it's the oldest still existing Jugendstil architecture in Europe. So a lot of people come actually because of the architecture, but then they also confronted with the art in the exhibition. There are three different kind of levels of ways of exhibiting or spaces of exhibiting in the building. There's the main room, which is an overlight exhibition space, very vast. It's a space every artist wants to exhibit in. It's beautiful, but it's very tricky and difficult as well. There's a small cabinet on the first floor, which is more appropriate to very complex, dense works, which have to do more with research or screening, but it's a very nice space as well. And then in the basement, there are three spaces you're looking at here. You would come in from the left side, and again, there's the first space, the space you enter first, is very similar to the big space upstairs, just it's a smaller dimension, it's smaller, but it's the same floor plan, so to say. And there are three spaces. The middle space, space 2, is hardly used by any artist because it has an exhibition, an exit route, emergency exit route, it has another entrance to an office, it has a beam on the ceiling, 2 different floors. So it's kind of very distracting, the whole space. A lot of artists just don't really use it for their main installations. And then you enter another space, a very beautiful, long, classical exhibition space. And I didn't know what to do with the invitation, and then after a while I decided I want to focus on something I've been dealing with for a long time, but which I never focused on in a single exhibition. And I've been dealing a lot with representation and presentation, sometimes in gender issues, sometimes in political issues like the Cold War, but it's very often related to how aesthetics actually express a certain ideology. But I've never really, as a single subject, I never focused on it. So I thought, this is where I'm going here in Vienna. And what I basically did was I built an architecture which combined 3 different presentation architectures in one and put it right in there. So what you see is literally one exhibition, one architecture. It combines stage, cabinet, and catwalk as 3 different kind of representational spaces, but also presentation spaces. You see, It's a stage, but it doesn't really give much of a stage. It's the literal thing of a stage is that you as a visitor have to step on to actually get to the other spaces behind that. So there's no costumes, there's no stage design, but there is this thing, you have to get on stage, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where you don't know what are you doing there? Are you acting or are you not? Can you act out or not? There's no audience all of a sudden, and, but you are there. You feel very uncomfortable. It's also, you have a vast space behind you, and this is just covering a tiny little corner, and it's not very representative. But then you're drawn into a hallway, which kind of lurks you in. But still, you're not there yet. You have to make a decision. Are you going to further? Are you going to enter the architecture, or are you going to step off the stage again and leave? But then a lot of people have this curiosity. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what lays behind. So you go ahead. You go into this narrow hallway, and what I did was that I lifted the floor, I dropped down the ceiling, I shifted the walls from the side. So all of a sudden everything becomes narrow. You can touch the ceiling. Even a tall person would even crash the lights which are in the middle of the hallway. So it's not a claustrophobic feeling you're having there, but it is something which draws you in, which tightens the space around you and kind of sucks you in. Now I'm going to make a break because I want to show you a photograph of the people I worked with. These are the people at the opening. There are two missing, but this is the group of people who actually built this whole thing with me. They did a lot of research on old carpentry techniques because, for instance, we couldn't get on the outside of the building to screw it in only on two places. All the rest had to be done in an old-fashioned way. So these guys were extremely great, and I'm very thankful to them to realize the work with me. But back to the space, back to the architecture. So you'd follow this hallway, and all of a sudden the space to the right would open up, which I call the cabinet. And here you also see different chalk drawings. The chalk drawings almost look like silk screen print. It's made from a wet chalk which dries and then almost looks like silk screen print paint. And all these drawings, they're abstract drawings, or concrete drawings you actually could call them. They are referencing different modes, different metaphors of the in-between space or the left-out space. You talked about the in-between in your introduction, and so you're in this cabinet, you're in that space, and you're in between two other spaces. You're in between the stage and the catwalk. And then you have these metaphors which deal with fans, which deal with the passage, the in-between. On this one, you see that there's these leftovers, so it's creating spaces. Here, you might not see it, there are yellow lines too, so it creates a fence, it creates before and behind. And this is where you are. You are before another space, and you are behind another space. You're right in the center, but the center where you hardly can orient yourself. The whole wood is kind of around you and surrounds you and kind of sucks you into a situation where you don't really see all the other spaces any longer. But if you go further, and no, again, I have to make a break. This is the curator I've been working with. First you saw the guys who actually installed it with me. This is the curator who conceptually, financially, and also in terms of motivation, dealt with me for a year to realize this project. She was fantastic. This is before the opening, so the wax, we waxed this whole space. It wasn't totally dry, that's why she had taken off her shoes, like I have taken off my shoes, for a different purpose. But that's her, and she's going through the space, and that's where I caught her. But if you continue behind her, if you pass her and behind her, you're on this long line, you're on a catwalk all of a sudden. You're exposed into a third room, This is not the final setting of the room, but I'm showing you this anyway. So you are walking on this catwalk. And if you continue, you realize that you're already in the space. You're not in the beginning of the space. The architecture kind of lured you in already a few meters, so you don't have the distance to the space. You can't separate yourself. You're already in it again. And as you can see with the wallpaper, it's a thick, almost rubber-like wallpaper which doesn't go around all the wall. It creates again a stage-like situation. And you are on the catwalk. You're the one who is exposed. You're the one we are looking at. But it's a decision you can make if you want to be exposed on the catwalk, or if you step down. But then you step down and you are on the stage again. There's no escape in this situation. You're always exposed. You're always some kind of an actor. And then you see the chairs. You see these Tonet chairs of the Tonet brothers, and they are curling around the floor. They are laughing at you. They are laughing at you on the catwalk. They're making fun of you. They're leaning against the wall, and it's up to you. Do you want to be part of them? Do you want to be a chair as well, or do you want to stay on the catwalk? So this is a point where you again have to make a decision. What do you want to be, and where do you want to be? And of course, then you have to leave. You have to leave in a way you've never left before. You have to go through all this again, through all the mashika, through all the problems and the hallway, the lights, the drawings, the spaces. You have to pass the cabinet, and you have to step off the empty stage in the end and leave the space. But what does this all have to do with representation, with presentation? Of course, I don't have to say much about presentation and the stage. It's all there. We all have seen it, we all have experienced it, we know it. But talking a little bit about the cabinet, what does a cabinet is, what is it, what does it represent, what's an office and headquarter is like. And here I'm giving you one of, we have to drop in time again back into the 15th century, to the Renaissance. And here it's, we find ourselves in a castle of the Duke Federico da Montefeltro, the Duke of Gubbio, who commissioned two spaces, two studiolos, which would work as his headquarters. These are the centers for his kingdom, where he creates the visions for his kingdom and his people. But at the same time, they have to represent him. You have to represent him as a very progressive Duke of the Renaissance. So everything you see here, you see his books, you see his scripts, you see his music instruments. On the other side, you see his weapons. So you literally want to sit down on that bench, but you can't. It's all two-dimensional. This is at the highest point of the art of marquetry, of inlay. So this is all, it's not painted, it's not three-dimensional. It's all done by laying different colors of wood in beside each other, or into each other. But it's absolutely magnificent. There are two spaces. One is still left in Italy. One was dismantled and transported to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. A different time, a different space again. So I found myself in this space in New York once. Later I found myself in a space in Italy, which was a bit disappointing because you could hardly see anything. It was all broken and fallen apart. But when I found myself in the space at the Metropolitan, they had reconstructed it, and it was just unbelievable. You want to grab into the shelves, and there are no shelves. It's no space. It's all two-dimensional. This is one of the references I gave. There's a second reference, Friedrich Kiesler, who was a very famous exhibition designer in the early 20th century, exhibition designer, shop window designer. He also designed the first exhibition of Peggy Guggenheim in 1941. And here you see it's a thing called City of Space. It's again about exhibiting. There are places you can lay out text, you can lay out objects. It was for a commercial exhibition. Another last reference I want to give you is a cowboy shed. You see that the cowboys have covered all the walls with newspaper, but it's not. It's for a rational purpose, just to let not the wind in the shed. But it turned into almost like a display with all the little elements, photographs, newspaper clips, and so on. At this point, I should talk about my behavior towards audience, my ideas about audience. I'm an audience very often myself when I go to exhibitions. But I don't know if I want to do it, if I want to go too deep into it. But there are a couple points I still want to point out. What's the relationship between the piece and the secession? And here, this is all like very slick, all very nicely done, very handcrafted. And now here coming into a ceiling of trash basically, which is not. It's not a ceiling of trash. It's again, it has references, but it has very temporary references. You have pieces of former exhibitions here at the model. You have technical references like the grills to the architecture of the building. This is one section, and this is the main section of the whole ceiling. So there are these references. There's the colorful pieces from the A.A. Bronson General Idea exhibition there, the text pieces from Leipzig, from the Leipzig show. So there's a past in here of the exhibitions of the last 5 years, but there's also more. There are the plastic sheets, and the plastic sheets are taken from a one-day or one-night exhibition which took part at Joe Weir's and Joe Walker and Grace Weir's place. It was called Graceland, and one of the artists created a light sculpture, and these plastic sheets are from there. So from the model you step out, and there's another cultural activity, very much also the model sympathized with at the time. And then there are things which totally have nothing to do with art or any kind of cultural thing. The corrugated sheets at the ceiling. Some of them we actually took down from a shed here close to Sligo. But this is the referential part is not what I'm so interested in. It's the audience. You can't experience anything with the secession piece if you don't make this first step. You have to step on the structure to go in there, to experience something. You have to engage. And it's a lighter step maybe here, but you still have to trust. You have to trust to go under the ceiling, and you see at certain points are holes where you can see the other ceiling, the actual height. So there's this wish of myself, of you to engage. I want you in this space. I want you here. I want you actually to move in here, to live here, in this with a different height, with a different ceiling, with a different history. But I need you. If this space is empty, it's dead. It's nothing. It's not art. It's not a piece. It needs you to engage with it, to come in here, to listen to the sound pieces, to walk around, and all of a sudden you realize this is not just trash. There's a thought to it. There's certain questions of painting to it. There are certain questions of collage to it. And then there are certain questions which have nothing to do with anything. And you just don't get that close to a roof usually, as here you can. But I need you. I need you as an audience. I need you here to make this work live, to complete it, basically. But we promised in the press release that this would also be a talk about the audience. So I give you 3 different other examples very quickly. How I, even in the early stages of my career, thought about audience. And I'm not coming from an cultural family, I'm coming from working class, and I didn't study art. So the reception of art was always something I had in mind. This is a piece I did in 1994 in a social housing area. So in front of, there are about 8 of these meadows. In front of them is one building, a 10-floor social housing I grew up in. So I did this for a biennial, this piece, and it would go along all these meadows, these kind of very simple geometric chalk drawings. But if any kind of art tourist would come along, they wouldn't see anything. They would walk over a chalk line, and 10 minutes later they would chalk over another chalk line. It was made for the people who lived there, and specifically you needed a certain angle to look at it, to actually get the whole perspective, to get the whole picture. And the higher you got, you more actually saw the layout over first maybe 2 meadows, and you get higher, and then in the end you could actually see the whole layout of 8 of these meadows, and the shapes and the sizes changed from meadow to meadow. But I could also talk about a totally different approach to the audience. This was a museum show consisting of 9 spaces, and I reorganized the spaces in a way that you had to go from space 1 to space 2 to space 3 till space 9, and then all the way back again. And all these would put you in a certain physical activity, a certain physical situation. Here you see the Cold War curtain. It actually enclosed a space of 4 by 4 meters. Again, you would be enclosed like the Secession piece. You had to be inside something. You had to go through this curtain, then you would be totally surrounded by 64,000 wooden beads. And you had, when you exit on the other side, all of a sudden you would be in a totally different part of an exhibition, which looked different, had different subjects, but was still my exhibition. So this is almost like a Christian shower or something. I'm talking about transition spaces here as well. I could talk about limiting the audience to a group of active people. This was a paintball performance I did with about 35 people. 17 of them were shooting. 16 of them were shooting. There were 8 billboards, and all these people had actually to shoot at one. They were in pairs. There were always 2 shooting and 1 painting, except the one girl you see in front. Her partner, it was a guy, he actually was only allowed to get the munition. She would, she would not allow him to shoot at it. All the others would have to argue to create an abstract picture, but as a corporation, basically. There was no audience. These 35 people, there was a little audience which passed by. It was in a public space, but there was no literal audience. I didn't care about the audience at this time. I cared about the 35 people who participated in this project. So you can see there are different kind of approaches and towards audience, thinking about me, myself as an audience. But there's no such thing as the audience, and there's no such thing as a formal question to it. There are always different answers to it in specific situations, and what I've been created here is very specific to the place I found to the situation. Instead of going deeper into this project, I want to go to a last project I did in 1998 for the Manifesta 2. For you who you don't know Manifesta, Manifesta is a European biennial, but unlike other biennials, the Manifesta is taking place in different cities. So you have the Venice Biennial, which always takes place in Venice. You have the Sao Paulo Biennial, which always takes place in Sao Paulo, but Manifesta always takes in European cities, but usually not in the main cities, it's in the periphery. So Luxembourg isn't known as the capital of art in Europe, but it still happened there in 1998, and I was one of the first artists to be invited. But very soon I decided not to do an exhibition in the space, not to go into the museum. I decided to do a city space work, and this is the work I denied you to talk about earlier. When I talked about the work I did in the past, which deal with text, which deals with poetry, which deals with space. And at the time I was researching a lot how space kind of exists in a city, in libraries, in private bookshops, in advertisement, in city name, in street names, but also as placeholders in traffic signs. Traffic signs are a language by themselves already, but they're also placeholders for whole captions of laws of text. And this is what I was kind of interested, how city expresses itself with text. So I wrote a literature text, a poetic text, which had no it had no linear narrative. It's a very loose structure of poetic rhymes, of poetic speed. This was important because I spread out the text all over the city. So there were 7 or 8 venues where this happened. And all these venues were very specific in the way I selected them. And they all had to do with certain problems of the city. For instance, this underground bar, it's actually under a bus station. It's a whole little inner place, actually, inner space, with a bar. It was criminalized by the government of the city, by the city council for years. There would be drug dealing, there would be violence. I've spent so much time there, I haven't seen any drug dealing, I haven't seen any violence. It's just a public space and people use this public space. So I specifically went to the owner of the bar and he was totally thrilled. He said, well, that's great, let's use poetry. And he allowed me to put up the poetry there. This is a bus station. The bus station above this underground bar I was just talking about was much more central, was much more populated. It was also very close to one of the main venues of the Manifesta. So more curators and colleagues and art tourists would have seen it there. But this was just a passing through bus station. This is a bus station where all the buses arrived and started into the country of Luxembourg. So everybody who worked in the city but didn't live in the city, a lot of them would come by buses and they would arrive and leave from there. So five times a week, in the morning and the evening, all the people would get off the bus or wait for the bus here. So there's a totally different consistency towards this text, a totally different possibility to grab a sentence, to grab a word, take it with you. You over 3 months you kind of realize that there is something. So these are the very distinctive decisions I made to select the places, to put up the text. I haven't spoken that much about this piece here, about the ceiling, about the installation. I haven't spoken at all about the boat and the river, and I'm not going to do it. We might, if you're interested in, you can ask these questions. If you're not, you don't have to ask these questions, but you don't get my answers. This is literally the end of the talk, but before I end it, I'm going to give you some poetry on the way. It's the poetry of this piece. And we started with a literature piece, so I think it's just appropriate to end it with. It's in English, and I'm not going to apologize for my bad English here. I do it anyway. So let the lines grow with you in a ring of roses, followed by peeled hardness, clearly delineated, seeds running on their own and heaped with silver crown, let up from itself, crawled out of the lap in history, gregarious, pale and respectless, lost in mid-air, horny and close to heaven. Say, up, up, hounding the letter, pounding the letter, line after line, rhyme after rhyme. Say, yet. Rhyme is fixed and nothing is only prevented, and nothing is just written. Conviviality chases muse and light follows text. For nothing is barely, and nothing is hardly, and also for. With sheer foolishness, being hit and silvertail, be afraid and dizziness and stick to the foolishness of songs, shortened is thicker and seldom, and comes without, and walks off again. Hop, lop, on top. With here, with and forevermore run back and forth and spun. It is the salt in the column shade, and also with anyway, there itself and erect, with pride and prump, and pump, and pump, and pump, and without, therefore it's the same, up and down, say ho, ho, closed, and at the same time in the rhyme, and rhyme is fixed, facing politics, in the vis-a-vis, marching in step, and laid on with the phrase, therefore, say, in any case on top. If not, and then even more, and so,
and sometimes afterwards, and the bag is turned upside down, intertwined as woolly up to the shelf, and woolly up to the self, and call the bullet very close, then you succeed without, and if not, is still the Peter. Indulging with fight with you, municipally. So off you go and run yourself in pace, in step, in line, straight of course, well straight and morally, in order not to. Two is often, having run means having won, and straight as rhyme is poetry, is fixed. The shoes are on purpose, and with them bound, bonded to, say, also bunched, say, hoed, hopped. The runners shine, the runners rhyme, and rhyme is fixed, it says, slime. With them and you alone in the ring arose, far and snare, and straight comes two, even if. And as the bag again, in line and straight, Peter runs of its own accord with swing and song and knack, whack, whack, place your hand on it, or high five, nothing remains foreign, and the rubbing goes on regardless healthy and hot, not hot, with sweat and meaningless. The rhyme is right in any case, and you and I, in the text, it remains put on and not so well. It's jumping and you are a drunkard from the stand and in order to, not that I would be addicted to, but that too, in such waffleless groundle of rarity, a bush with calmness, and here the text jumps, the line jumps very close, spray around the sight, but quickness does not count. It is kept, it is wound around itself, and yellow path, but poetry is also fixed and junk in any case, the text counts. And you as a reader, and with, it remains the same, and with the text also you and the line and the word and wound intertwines that drop, rolled up, self-decorated and unsteady. Pa. The praiser fits with ratherness, with rising and is similar and even self-current, and then say, ha, say, ha, plop. Let them, without, and to you in the face with slime and hypocrisy, and still on the meter, close and closer, but poetry is fixed. It is with me and you and without. Well, get off and bring the odor from the mountain cottage into the creepers. Safety is unsteady with the word well, hull, end, say, and with, say, and with hull. We project your coolness as pupils, calm space, and your penis races in seconds almost as proof, almost as with end, a la slumber. Tight and truly not tight and rolled, and the runner remains with, does not remain without, in order to, is yellow, and is girdled, and the girdle is tight, has been put on and put around, and the text let their colors be known, tight, spotted, and most definitely not only as color, leaning on the landing unsteadily, within, and in any case, and also. Thank you.